you want to start your video again, you can. I'm Craig Swanson. I'm the president of Keep Sedona Beautiful, and I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon for Denise Gibbs' presentation on monarch butterflies. Before I introduce Denise, I want to note that our next speaker series presentation is going to be on Wednesday, September 16th. We normally take the summers off from these, and that on Wednesday, September 18th, will start at 5 o'clock and will be held at the KSB Eco Hub, 360 Brewer Road in Sedona, and we'll post information about that event in August. Denise Gibbs had a 37-year career as an interpretive park naturalist. She owned a native plant nursery specializing in native nectar and host plants for butterflies. She conducted a long-term research project on the fall migration at a National Wildlife Refuge in Virginia. And for the past 16 years, she served as a monarch conservation specialist for Monarch Watch. Denise is going to share information with us tonight on monarch butterflies and discuss their serious decline in numbers. She'll talk about the reasons why and how we can each take steps to help them recover and thrive. After her presentation, Denise will take questions from our Zoom audience, and if you'd like to pose a question to her, you can enter it either in chat or using the Q&A feature of Zoom, and I'll collect and pose those questions to her. With that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Denise Gibbs, and Denise, you can go ahead and start sharing your screen if you'd like.
Okay, thank you. 1 second.
All right. Looks good.
Okay, let me first say thank you for having me. Thanks everybody for joining. And can everyone hear me okay before I continue?
I certainly can, so it should be good.
Okay.
Thanks for asking.
Okay. Before I begin, I just want to tell you what to expect. This will be about an hour long. The first half will be some background on monarch butterflies, their life history and their migration, both in the eastern part of the US and the western part. And then the second half will be more specific to our region, to the Verde Valley and to Sedona, and specifically what you can do to become involved to help in the recovery of the species. So I'll start with my title, For the Love of Monarchs, because I really do love monarchs. I have devoted probably most of my adult life to conserving them. And some of the things I have done and that you'll be able to do as well is to plant butterfly gardens with all the plants that monarchs love and need. I've also planted many wildflower meadows on both public and private lands throughout the East. I became a citizen scientist so that I could study the monarch migration in the East and learn more about what their needs are there. I had a native plant nursery that I grew plants mostly for butterflies, both their nectar and their host plants, with a specialty of growing milkweeds. I've also taught many classes to all sorts of audiences. The one pictured here is an Ollie class that I did when I first moved here 8 years ago. And this was Mike Wagner's monarch base station in the village of Boat Creek. We had the privilege of him giving us a tour during that class. And then I've done a lot of monarch tagging, first for the late Dr. Lincoln Brower, and then later for Monarch Watch, and now for the Southwest Monarch Study. So we could learn more about their migration, the places that they're traveling and stopping, so that we can help conserve those places as well. But with all this, it's still not enough. So what's happened now is the situation with the Western monarch population has become dire. And this is an urgent message from the Xerces Society, basically a call for help for all hands on deck. That means everybody needs to get involved. And there's a lot you can do. And this is their call to action and their steps for recovery. The first two, of course, don't apply to us here unless you own land or property in California. Then what I would suggest you do is go to this website and download this file. It has very specific instructions about what you can do if you're in California. But I highlighted number 3 and 4 because those are two things that we can do here. So those are the two things we're going to focus on today. And before we do that, let me just give you just a very brief background in monarch life history. This is just a simple illustration of their life cycle from egg to larva or caterpillar to chrysalis or pupa, and then to adult. And then finally, with the last generation, the migration to southerly places. Okay, so what happens in the eastern US, we know now that the population migrates to Mexico in the fall. And in the western states, west of the Rocky Mountains, the population goes to California and Mexico. And we've learned this by tagging the monarchs and by finding the tag monarchs in these locations. So, so let's start with the east. For 20 years, starting in '97, I became a citizen scientist, and I studied the monarch migration on Chincoteague Island, Virginia, which is also Chincoteague National Wildlife Refuge. I was working for the late Dr. Lincoln Brower. He wanted me to tag so that we could figure out where the monarchs were going and the path that they used to get there. And so that was one reason for doing the study. Another reason was the biologists that worked at the refuge wanted me to document how the migrating monarchs were utilizing the resources on the refuge. So I did a Pollard transect, which was a 5-mile drive, counting monarchs as they migrated over. I did a point count on the primary dune and several other things. One of them being I was collecting data on the behavior of the monarchs when they were roosting. So this is a roost on Oyster Bay, and I usually tried to get there before sunrise to see if there were any monarchs that had roosted that had tags from other locations. One of the things the good thing that came out of this 20 years was 10 years in, the biologist asked me if I would write a management plan for the refuge for migratory monarchs, and which I did. And then the second 10 years, I had the pleasure of seeing them implement those management strategies, which really made a difference in how successful the monarchs were migrating over this area. So I was tagging first with Dr. Brower's tags, which were a rectangular tag that was wrapped over the leading edge of the forewing, and then later on for Monarch Watch using their round tags. And you can see in the orange what their tag said. If anybody found a monarch with that tag, they would report that information. And from that, we could plot where the monarch, we sort of connect the dots of where they were being recovered. So we knew their migratory path through the sky. This particular monarch was found every morning. I get up before sunrise and go out to the beach and with a headlamp and try to find roosts of monarchs that had spent the night there, and look for tag monarchs. And this particular one that I found was from Connecticut. So I did recover many monarchs from other states north of Chincoteague. So that let me know that this was a critical stopover for a lot of East Coast migrating monarchs. So where are they ending up? They're ending up, hopefully, if all goes well, they're ending up in Mexico. Some monarchs don't make it that far. They end up joining the overwintering populations in South Florida and other places. I even had a monarch, when I was tagging with Dr. Brower's tags, I had a monarch recovered in Cuba. And Dr. Brower was so excited about that he called me like, I don't know, 4 in the morning and said, "How soon can you be on a plane to Cuba?" And I just said, "Who is this? Why are you calling me?" So that was a big deal to find. I don't think one had ever been found in Cuba before. So we actually learned a lot about the migration and where these monarchs were ending up. So if some of you may have been to Mexico to see this, it's pretty spectacular. There are several preserves within the Monarch Biosphere Reserve. And I would like to talk, I could probably talk for hours about this, but I want to move on to other things. But I'll just say this, if you have any questions or need anything clarified later on, I have my email address at the bottom and you're welcome to email me for more information. So every year, there are counts done in Mexico to figure out how big the monarch overwintering population is. They don't actually count the monarchs, they actually count, or they measure the trees where the monarchs are roosting. And it's done in hectares. And so 1 hectare is about 2.5 acres. And if you look at this past season, it was not good. So Eastern monarch population numbers are down according to this. So that's not good. If you look over here, if you look at 1997, way on the left there, that's the year I started my study on Chincoteague. And just to give you an example of how many monarchs were migrating that fall, I was driving on the beach road, and it was a blizzard of monarchs. There were so many monarchs, I couldn't see out my windshield to drive, and didn't dare turn my windshield wipers on because I would have gotten 10 or 20 monarchs with each swipe. So that was an amazing year. On my point count on the primary dune, in 4 hours time, I had counted over 100,000 monarchs. And then if you look at 2013, down there where it says 0.67 hectares, I saw a total of 2 monarchs that fall. So quite a difference. All right, let's move to the Southwest. And this is Gail Morris, who is the coordinator of the Southwest Monarch Study. She has a tagging program going on, as well as the Xerces, the folks at Monarchs of the Pacific Northwest. And here are her tags that she uses. And anybody can order these tags and tag monarchs. It's a lot of fun to do. And the more people doing it, the more data will be turned in, and the more we'll know about the migration in the Southwest. Really not a lot is known about it yet. So you can order these from Southwest Monarch Study. And when she plotted the data from those tagging, those tag monarchs when they were recovered, this is what it looks like. She still has a couple years to add to this, but this gives you an idea of where fall migrating monarchs are going in the Southwest. And you know, a lot of this wasn't known before. And just let you know, the red doesn't have any significance other than those were the earlier years, and the yellow is the most recent. So what you can get from this map is that, first of all, look at Arizona to Mexico and Arizona to California. It's almost even. So you could almost say that half the monarchs from here go to California for the winter and half go to Mexico. The other thing that's kind of striking about this, when I was doing my study in the mid-Atlantic, you know, monarchs are pretty much heading or trying to go southwest. Here, it's totally different. And it took me a while to wrap my head around these red lines that are going from southeastern Arizona northwest up to the coast of California. So that was a surprising thing for me. Here's the other thing I want to point out to you. Let's see if I get can you all see this cursor? This line right here from central New Mexico to Mexico. I want you to remember that line, because I'm going to bring up something else later on in the slideshow that's significant for that. Okay. So just quickly, how do they find their way? Well, studies have been done, and scientists have learned that monarchs are using a sun compass. And you can, if you're tagging a monarch, you can notice this right away, because as soon as you release them after tagging them, they usually fly straight up and land somewhere. And it's like they're sitting there getting their bearings, like they're looking at the sun's angle on the horizon, and from that they can tell which direction they need to fly. They're also using visual cues, and I've seen this many times in the East. I've seen monarchs just migrating right over where the waves are hitting the shore. and over mountain ridges and along rivers. So they are using these visual cues to help guide their way, and that's true in the Verde Valley as well. I'll show you that in a minute. And then it's also thought they're using a magnetic compass. There's a lot of discussion about this online, so if you want to know more about it, I urge you to go on and read about how they're determining this. Okay, so in the Verde Valley, if we're lucky, we'll see 3 generations of monarchs. Now, these are the breeding monarchs that only live as adults for about a month to 6 weeks. And then the last generation, in anywhere from August through October, they're the ones that are going to migrate. And they are able to live up to 9 months. And the reason for that is they're in reproductive diapause. They don't have to use their energy for finding a mate and mating and laying eggs. Their only urge is to migrate. So we usually see them here, depending on a lot of factors, including, wind speed and direction and all that, how when they left Mexico or California. But we usually see them here in late June or early July. So that doesn't give them much time. So we usually only have the 2 generations. And the first year I was here in 2016, we actually had 3. And then you can see below the chart of the peak migration, if you want to try to observe the migration, looks like September 19th would be a good time to start looking. And what I did when I first got here, we moved here in August and I hadn't even unpacked the boxes yet. And I'm out driving around looking for migrating monarchs and milkweed patches and nectar patches and possible areas where they might use as a migration corridor. And what I found once the migration started, it was a pretty good one that year, is that they're following the Verde River south down toward Phoenix. And I also found them using Route 17, just flying right over it, using that as a corridor. And luckily, we've got the Sedona wetlands because there were a lot of nectar sources there. And I would just hang out there and wait for the monarchs to fly in and start nectaring so I could tag them. And I've also seen monarchs migrating up over the Black Hills, following pretty much 89A up through Jerome and to the top of Mingus. There's actually quite a bit of milkweed and nectar sources on top of Mingus. I would just sit at the picnic table up there and watch them arrive and stop to nectar for a while and then just head back down the other side of the mountain. So we do have these migration corridors where you can see it happening if it's a good migration year. Oh, and I just wanted to point out one other thing in the lower part of that map. There's our new state park, Rocking River Ranch State Park. I predict this is going to be a hot spot, both for breeding monarchs in the summer and for fall migrating monarchs. So try to make a stop there at some point in the fall to see what you can see. I may actually even lead a few tagging trips there and butterfly walks, so watch for those. Okay, so that same year, this was the first monarch that I tagged in Arizona. So that was a big celebration for me. And this actually turned out to be a great area, which is the restored grasslands area at Montezuma Well. If you are planning to tag in one of these locations, you do have to apply for permits, federal or state or local permits to net tag and release monarchs on those properties. So I did get a federal permit for this. And since that first year, I've actually been tagging for the National Park Service almost every year after that, and also doing surveys of breeding monarchs in these same areas. Okay, so if you go online, you see a lot of maps of the migration patterns in the West, and I'm not happy with any of them. This is the best one I could find. It's from the Xerces Society, but I do have some comments about it. First of all, if you look down at the Mexican part, you see that dotted arrow, which they're not sure if monarchs come back to Arizona from Mexico. Well, I guess it's never been documented. And I actually came here every March for about 30 years, and I would sit at the border and watch the monarchs fly into Arizona. But I just thought that was normal. I didn't know that no one had ever documented it before, so I didn't. But now I'm told that it must be documented for them to change the map. Um, the San Pedro River is a migration corridor, so you can see them coming right just along the riparian area there. And the fields that are beside the river there have nectar sources, and the monarchs do come down to nectar. And then if you look in the upper portion where the blue says no milkweed, we were up in Vancouver and Vancouver Island last year, a couple of years ago actually, and I found showy milkweed in a lot of places. I'm kind of perplexed why they have no milkweed there. Even as far up on Vancouver Island as Tofino, the house we rented had a garden of showy milkweed, and the owner said that about every third year the monarchs make it that far, and they do have at least one generation. So there needs to be some changes to these maps to make them more accurate. So here's where our western monarchs are going in California, one of the places in California. The orange dots are the overwintering preserves that are monitored. And the dotted yellow lines are the count areas for the volunteers who do the annual Thanksgiving count of monarchs. Now, it's a little bit different when they do the count in California. They're actually counting individuals because there just aren't that many. At most of these preserves are pretty small, so there's not a lot of monarchs at each one except for a few. So they're actually counting individuals, or they're counting by tens and estimating. I have been to many of these locations, and each year I go back and try to visit a few more. It's definitely worth a trip if you've never seen it. And by far my favorite one is Pismo Beach State Park, where the largest numbers of monarchs roost for the winter. So if you get there early in the morning, the monarchs are still have their wings closed and they're just holding still. But as soon as the sun hits them, they start basking. So it's quite a spectacular display. You hit it just right. So here's the results of the counts that have been done at these California preserves. And if you look at this past winter, the numbers are down from the 2 previous years, which is not good. Part of the reason for that is probably all the horrible storms and the high winds they had this past winter. But there's a lot of other reasons as well. So here's what's going on. So we have pretty much, across the country, a loss of habitat for monarchs for a lot of reasons. Pesticides are a big issue. The use in home gardens, in plant nurseries, and commercial agriculture, especially in California. I was driving north on Highway 1 after just seeing a lot of monarchs at one of the state park preserves. And the area between the ocean and Route 1 had crops that looked like pineapple. And as I was driving by, a crop duster flew over right where the monarchs were migrating. So, a lot of the emphasis now is on California and what they can do to make things better for the monarchs there. And then the biggie is actually changes in weather patterns due to climate change. Not much we can do about this at this point, but you just need to know what's going on. And here's one local example that, if you remember, last summer we really didn't have a monsoon. So last year, what happened was, in a normal monsoon season, we get a rebloom of a lot of species of wildflowers, and then those wildflowers are nectar sources for migrating monarchs in the fall. That didn't happen this past year, and a lot of plants just totally dried up and became brown and crispy. There was hardly anything for any butterflies to nectar on, and especially for the monarchs, because they came through a little late last year. So really, there were hardly any nectar sources. And then, another example is the increased, those storms in California have always happened, but they're just becoming more frequent and more severe. So that's impacting the monarchs there. All right, I've given you the doom and gloom. Let me just give you a few things to uplift you a little bit and add a bit of positivity to this. Last year, a monarch, a female, came into my yard, and I have, of course, a lot of milkweed here. She laid, I watched her lay at least 100 eggs. She probably laid more on the horsetail milkweed, and they made it to the caterpillar stage. Nothing ate them. So I had a lot of caterpillars in mid-October, but this one caterpillar in particular seemed very feisty. I saw him leaving the plant one day in mid-October, and so that was a signal that he was going off to find a place to make his chrysalis. And so I just scooped him up and I put him in my cage, and he pupated the next day. So I kept him until he closed or emerged as an adult. And then I waited 24 hours after he emerged so his wings could be totally dry. And then I tagged him and put some nectar sources in the cage so he could feed, because I knew there wasn't much out in the wild for him. So when I took him out of the cage and I released him, he didn't hesitate at all. He the cage was outside, so he had already oriented to the sun. He knew exactly which way to go, and he headed due southwest. And I thought, as he flew off, I thought, he's going to make it. And here's what happened. So he did make it. He made it to California, and he was recovered, still alive, in March of this year. There's no way of knowing, where he spent the winter. It might have been there, it might have been further south, but there he is. And he was found taking a little swim in someone's swimming pool, and she scooped him out, saved his life, and there he is. And you can tell this is a remigrant because if you look at the condition of his wings, he's been through some rough weather and other things. That's typical of what they look like when they're coming back in the spring. And the significance of this is that he's only one of 3 southwestern monarchs tagged in November to be recovered in the spring, because that's really considered too late for them to make it anywhere. Yet he did. So that gives me hope. Something else kind of exciting, we drove to Texas to watch the eclipse, and we made a stop at this Oliver Lee State Park in New Mexico to have lunch. And while I'm sitting there, the wind was just ridiculous. It was 24 miles per hour, but it was warm. And just sitting there, this monarch flew by, and it was using the same trajectory as that one I showed you earlier on the map that was heading south. It was just to the right of White Sands, and because the wind was blowing so strong, he was facing like he wanted to go north, but he was being blown sideways. It was actually being blown northeast, and he probably made it over those mountains by up to Roswell by the end of the day, I'm sure. So that was kind of neat to see, a returning monarch from Mexico coming up through New Mexico. And just real quick, here's the current state of monarch tagging. This is a cellular technology, solar-powered radio transmitter that's glued onto the monarch. And I actually field tested a similar model when I was at Chincoteague, but it was too heavy and the monarch couldn't fly. But this new one weighs about the same amount as a down feather. So very light, doesn't impede the flight at all. And the cool thing is, if a monarch wearing that apparatus flies over, it can show up on your cell phone. And Audubon Society here is going to be installing 2 Modus receiver stations. So what I'm hoping to do is get trained on how to use this technology, and perhaps we can volunteers at these stations will be able to locate some of these monarchs that are passing over that have these new tags on them. So anyway, kind of exciting to think about. Okay, so back to what needs to be done. It really is all hands on deck, and whatever you can do, even just the smallest thing, if a lot of people do it, it's going to make a huge difference. So what we're focusing on is the breeding monarchs here, and also the migrating monarchs. And I can't say this enough, no milkweed, no monarchs. So if there's no milkweed, you're not going to see monarchs around during the summer. So you need to plant milkweed. Milkweed is the host plant for monarchs, any species of milkweed. And They're really not that hard to grow. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So whatever you can do to find milkweed and get it in the ground or put it in a pot, the more the better. Please do so. And I love this quote from Chip Taylor, the former director of Monarch Watch. He's now retired. It says, to assure a future for monarchs, conservation and restoration of milkweeds needs to become a national priority. And that's really true. It needs to be planted. We've lost so much of it. It really, as much as we can plant, the better. And they've started this Monarch Way Station program at Monarch Watch, where you can have your garden certified as long as you have what the monarchs need, and that means nectar sources and for adult monarchs to feed on during both the spring and fall migration, and also milkweed for the monarchs to lay their eggs on and for the caterpillars to feed on. And so if you have your garden certified, you can get this really cool sign to put on there, so impress all your neighbors. So here's the status of Monarch Way Stations in North America right now. If you look at Arizona, we've got 464. I'd like to see that number come up to 500 after this talk, so get ready. And I'll help you any way I can. It'd be even better to see 50,000 countrywide by the end of the year. So I'm working hard on that. So these are the requirements for a Monarch Way Station certification. You must have at least 100 square feet, which is not that big, at least 10 milkweed plants of 2 or more species, or a large number of 1 milkweed species. But again, the more the better. And it's nice to have different species because each one blooms at a slightly different time. So you've always got some in bloom as a nectar source. And then at least 4, but you're going to want more annuals, biennials, or perennial plants that are specifically for providing nectar for butterflies. And then you want to try to have something in bloom during each of those 3 seasons of spring, summer, and fall, and with the emphasis on fall. And that's actually my Monarch Meadow way station in Maryland, where I had common milkweed. Common milkweed, it runs on rhizomes and it clones itself. So you just put a few in a couple of years, you got hundreds of plants. So that was a good choice for a meadow habitat. So let's look at milkweed. If you're not familiar with it, it's kind of strange looking. It has this weird flower. And all milkweeds, are similar. Although I did find one exception this year in Texas. A few months ago, I found this green vining milkweed on the right there that really doesn't fit the characteristics of a typical milkweed. It's called pearl milkweed. Most milkweeds are in the genus Asclepias. This one was in the genus Atelia, but it was pretty spectacular. Still used by monarchs as a host plant. But the key thing here is Arizona. We're so lucky. We have over 30 native species of milkweed, so you have a lot to choose from. So it won't be boring. It's pretty exciting to try different species in your garden. So let's look at some of those species that I recommend for the Verde Valley and Sedona. Antelope horns or spider milkweed is the first one to bloom in the spring. Down here in Cornville and Cottonwood, it blooms in March. So this would not be a good choice for monarchs down here because it's finished blooming by May. And the monarchs are not even here yet. But if you live at a higher elevation, it blooms later. So if you're in Sedona, you could plant this and it would probably still be green for the monarchs to lay their eggs on when they arrive in June. And if you go further up into Flagstaff and Mormon Lake area, there's a lot of this up there and it's blooming well into August. So it is a good nectar source and host plant for monarchs up there. And this one tolerates really super dry conditions. So if that's what you have, this would be a good choice for you. Butterfly weed, I'm sure you've seen this one in the nurseries. This grows, I've seen it mostly up in Oak Creek Canyon in the pine woods. It seems to really like that dappled sunlight. So if you want it to be successful in your yard, I try to give it some dappled sunlight or afternoon shade. It really likes sandy soil. And this one has a taproot, so it stays put wherever you plant it. It does well in a planter for a few years if you don't have the ground for it. And it's in bloom, actually has quite a long bloom for a milkweed. This is my new favorite. This is Arizona milkweed. Normally you find this growing in the wild down in southeastern Arizona. But I tried it up here and it really, really likes it up here, especially in Sedona. It does well in the soils. And this one seems to be a preferred one for monarchs to lay their eggs on. When a female monarch is looking for a milkweed to lay her eggs on, she likes to choose the most toxic one so that her caterpillars have the most protection from predators, because all that milky sap and the cardinalides that are in it are actually distasteful to a lot of predators, not all of them, but to most of them. So this one must have a higher level of toxicity, because they really, I get a lot of eggs on this in my yard. And this one is nice. It's in a taproot. It also stays put. And I think this is probably one of the best ones for a container, to grow into a container. I've had one for almost 7 years now and it's still happy. So a pretty good one. The other one that is preferred by the monarchs in this area is the horsetail milkweed. This one's very toxic. In fact, the other name for it is poison milkweed. This one does go on rhizomes, so you would need a big area to plant this in, because it is going to spread. You also don't want to plant it if you have livestock, because it can be toxic to livestock. I had a woman come to one of my Ollie classes who was a rancher, and she said they spent a lot of time and money and years getting rid of it getting it out of their pastures. And but she still wanted to help monarchs, so she wanted to know which species she could grow as a nectar source. So at least she was, concerned about that. And recently I met a rancher in Cornville who wants to turn one of their old pastures into a milkweed meadow. So so things are turning, attitudes are changing. Oh, and I'm stuck again. Hang on. There we go. And then there's some really unusual ones in our area as well. This is Mojave milkweed. You won't find this in any nursery yet, but I'm working on the nurseries to try to get them to grow it, because it really, really does well in our caliche limestone soils down here. And it does occur in small numbers over at the Verde Valley Botanical Area in that soil over there. So if you ever find this one, buy it. Or if you find seeds, buy them, because this would be a really good one to have here. And here's the one I recommend the most for you folks up in Sedona. This is showy milkweed, probably one of our prettiest Arizona milkweeds. Has a long bloom. Normally you find this at the higher elevations, but it will grow in Sedona. I've seen this up in Oak Creek Canyon. I've seen a lot of it up by in the White Mountains as well, at the higher elevations. Very pretty. Has a taproot, so it doesn't spread around. It stays put. And if you grow it in mass like this picture, it's quite spectacular. Here's another favorite of mine. This is when I first got here, the master gardeners were doing test plots of people's yards to find out which milkweeds would do well in each of the various soils that we have here. And this is one of the ones that I test grew for them. This is broadleaf or corn kernel milkweed, and we have this horrible limestone soil behind our house in the Cornville grasslands, and this one actually did very well for about 3 years, and I thought that I was going to have it forever, but then a gopher came and ate the roots. But if you can find this one, it's a really beautiful. I mean, look at those big round leaves that have that bluish tint to them. It's just gorgeous. And the other pollinators really seem to love this one over the other milkweeds. Okay, so those were the milkweeds. Let's look at some must-have native nectar sources for our area. First, let me say, if you're only going to plant a few plants, choose ones that are going to bloom in the fall, because the migrating monarchs really need to nectar. They take the sugar from the plant, it gets converted to fat and gets stored on their abdomen. This is a monarch that had been sitting on a goldenrod plant for 5 days during a double whammy hurricane on the East Coast. And I had tagged it before the hurricanes came, and so I knew it was the same monarch still sitting there. It had a fat abdomen at the beginning of the 5 days. At the end of the 5 days, it's extremely lean. That monarch's not going anywhere till it rebuilds its fat. So the monarchs that are migrating really need to have that extra fat, because not only do they have to make it to their destination, they have to make it through the winter on that stored fat and then head back north in the spring. So really, fall nectar plants is critical. And one of the best ones for you to plant would be any kind of aster. This is actually a Bass Harbor light on the coast of Maine. And it was like that all day. It was just, millions of monarchs coming through there and stopping to nectar on that aster. And they find aster's irresistible. And in our area, any aster you can find, we have some purple tansy asters that you can collect seeds from and spread. Or you can go to a nursery and buy this white prairie aster, which does very well here. If you want to see it in the wild, it grows a lot along the Black Hawk Trail in Cornville and Page Springs. Now, on the East Coast, the seaside goldenrod along the ocean basically fuels the monarch migration. Without that, I don't know what they do. But here, it's a different story. We don't really have that many species of goldenrod, and they're not that common. There are a few species up on Mingus, but they're spread out. They're not en masse. There's one plant here, one plant there. I've never, since I've been here, have seen a monarch nectaring on goldenrod. So I would say, even though it's a fall blooming plant, not a great choice for the monarchs here. But here is one that is. This is Burr marigold. If you've been kayaking along the Verde River in the fall, you've probably seen this, especially in years after we've had a really good monsoon. This Biden species has to have standing water for its seeds to germinate. When like last year, we didn't have any of it. But you can get the seeds. You can order any Biden species from just about any nursery catalog and plant the seeds, and you'll have the same effect. Just to give you an idea, that picture was taken in one of the wet areas at Chincoteague that had flooded after 2 hurricanes, and there was about a foot of standing water. So that was a good year. And I went out there in my hip waders and tagged monarchs for 8 hours straight without stopping, and had tagged 2,000 monarchs by the end of the day, because just about every flower had a monarch nectaring on it. So really, really good. Try to find this one. And here's the opposite. Here's golden crownbeard growing at Montezuma Well in the most driest forest conditions ever, but it blooms away, and it's a great nectar source for migrating monarchs. You won't find this in any nursery because it's considered a weedy thing, but you can go collect the seeds and plant it yourself. Put it away from other things, because it does have a chemical in its roots that will kill any plants that are growing around it. So you would have a monoculture of it. But still, if you can put it in a pot or put it somewhere where it's not going to interfere with any other plant growth. Okay, when I show this picture, everybody usually groans in the audience, because it's baccharis or desert broom. And people here don't seem to like it because it is so invasive. But let me just tell you, you can't beat it as a fall nectar source for migrating monarchs. If you walk at the Sedona wetlands on a good migration day, you're going to see their bushes there along the walkway just covered with all kinds of butterflies, including monarchs. So this is where I do a lot of my tagging over at Montezuma Well, where these species grow. And there's actually a third species that grows at the wetlands as well, that blooms earlier. So definitely worth having, and you can find these in the nursery trade. Just know that it can be invasive. And then we have 2 Indian blankets. We have one that's in bloom right now called the red dome blanket flower, and then Indian blanket. Both of these are excellent. The red dome blanket flower will be finishing up its bloom right now, but it usually has a second bloom after the monsoon season. So another one that keeps blooming into fall. Rabbit brush doesn't really grow that well down here in the lower elevations, but in Sedona and up, it does okay. This is taken over in Prescott at Walden Woods, where there's a whole grove of this, and it's just covered in monarchs on peak migration days in the fall. And thank goodness for sunflowers, because last year when everything else had dried up, there were still a few wild sunflowers along the highways that were feeding the monarchs as they made their way south. And certainly easy to grow. You can get the seeds most places and just throw them out there. That's all you need to do. And it will support a lot of monarchs as they're migrating. If you look at that monarch on the sunflower in the lower left there, look at its torn wing. That's typical of damage that monarchs sustain during their migration. And everybody groans when I show this slide as well, but thistle, most of what we have here are non-native thistles, which are invasive, but we do have 3 or 4 native species that you can get seeds for. And just recently, Borderlands Nursery in Patagonia started selling them via mail order. And I got some last year and grew the Neo-Mexicanum, and it did beautifully until the gophers ate it. Here's an annual that's easy to grow as well. This is the southwestern native cosmos. You see a lot of these up along Mormon Lake. Go up and collect some seeds and throw them in a pot, and you'll have it, self-seeding year after year. Really a wonderful late summer, early fall nectar source for all butterflies. Greg's mistflower. If we're only going to pick one plant for my yard, this would be it. And that picture's not an exaggeration. That's what happens. Monarchs and queens alike are drawn to this plant. There are some reasons which I won't go in, don't have time to go into now, but it is a butterfly magnet. You need to have this. The one thing you need to know is that it does like moisture. So if it's in your yard, it will need irrigation. Or if you have a soggy spot or a ditch, it would grow in there. I just happen to have I divided mine because it was doing so well, and I have a 5-gallon pot of this ready to find its new home. So if anybody would like some, the first person that emails me, it goes to you. So just let me know. And then this was a new discovery last year. This came from Desert Survivors Nursery down in Tucson, fragrant mistflower. It's not native to here, it's native to Texas, but I wanted to try it because it has a late bloom from late October into late November. And it was perfect for last year when nothing else was in bloom and the monarchs came through late. This was the only thing in our garden at Page Springs that was still blooming. And it was every flower had a monarch on it a few days there during their migration. So definitely worth having if you can find it. Okay, let's talk about must-haves of non-native nectar sources. You can't go wrong with any kind of zinnia, and you can put, you don't have to put these in the ground. You can grow them in pots. In fact, most of my monarch waste station here in Cornville is in pots. That's butterfly weed in the back center, lantana, and a few other things. So you can meet the requirements for a monarch waste station even if you're only planting in pots. And then, of course, there's some good annuals you can use for spring, and pansies are one. Lots of pollinators use them. Lilac bushes are another. I know there's a lot of controversy about butterfly bushes, but if you're a responsible gardener and you cut those flowers off before they go to seed, it should be okay, so they won't spread. But if you must choose one, I would choose the woolly butterfly bush, which is native to Texas. A lot of pollinators come to it. It's pretty. It's got those nice woolly leaves, so it doesn't need much water. It's just great. And then, get yourself a packet of any kind of cosmos and throw them in a pot or in the ground, and you'll make the monarchs happy. Same thing with lantana. Any color or type of lantana is going to be great. Any kind of zinnia, any color, I should say, but what you want are the single flowered varieties. Same thing with marigolds. You want the single flowered varieties, not the big ball things. And then Mexican flame vine. If you can find this vine for sale that has not been treated with pesticides, buy one and you will not be disappointed. And Mexican sunflower, same thing as with the wild sunflowers. You just throw the seeds out and they grow, and it's irresistible to monarchs. And I don't normally promote the planting of cultivars like this pincushion flower, but actually I field tested all of the cultivars and they all have nectar and pollen, so they're all good for butterflies. Okay, here's the big issue. Where do you get these plants? If you're not growing them yourself from seed, then you need to know where you can buy them, where they're not treated with pesticides. And with the increased use of neonicotinoids, it's become a real problem. Um, in Arizona, if a plant is being shipped in from another state or Mexico, it has to be, not all of them, but most of them have to be treated with a pesticide before continuing on into Arizona. Um, so that's a problem because those plants end up at local nurseries and Home Depots and all that. And people don't know that they're buying a plant that might have been drenched in a pesticide, and all the pesticide is going up through the entire plant tissue, which is going to kill well, there's a couple of things that can happen. It can immediately kill anything that feeds on it, or the insect can fly away and die somewhere else, so you'll never know, or it can disrupt their reproductive system so they're not able to breed. So in any case, it's a bad thing. So you need to, always ask wherever you're buying your plants if they've been treated. So I did that at Verde River Growers. I made an appointment. I went over and talked to the grower and I said, what plants are not treated? And she said, well, the only thing right now that we don't treat are hackberry trees. Like, really? Because I didn't want to tell her this, but hackberry trees have 3 butterfly species that lay eggs on them. But I wasn't going to share that information. But anyway, and again, it depends on what kind of pesticide is used and when the plant was treated, because some of them just have a short life of a couple of weeks, others 6 months, sometimes a year, depending on what they're using. So always ask, and they're usually honest. They usually tell you, yes, either we treated them here or they were treated at the state line. So this is a problem. And then somebody, these folks a couple of years ago did the study where they just went around and bought milkweed plants from nurseries all over the US. And here's what they found, which is not shocking to me because I used to be in the nursery trade and I know what goes on. So they found multiple pesticides in every milkweed plant they sampled, and over 1/3 of the samples contained a pesticide at a known harmful concentration for monarchs. And plants labeled as wildlife friendly did not have fewer potentially harmful compounds. So I went over to a local store and I found this pot. It's tropical milkweed, which of course I don't want to plant because it's not native. But look at the pot. It's got a hummingbird and a butterfly on it, nature's nutrients. You think you're getting a good thing. But then you look at that little label that's got green on it, and it says this plant, in order to protect it from aphids and whiteflies and other harmful insects, has been drenched in a pesticide drench of neonicotinoids. So, so they're not ashamed to tell you that they've done it. It's just, the average person isn't going to know what that means, or that they're buying a plant that they think they're helping pollinators with, but actually they're not. So what do? Well, you buy from nurseries that are not using pesticides. We're very fortunate to have this program at NAU, started by and run by Mike Wagner, who lives in the village of Oak Creek. And they have many species of milkweeds that they sell in plug flats. So it's relatively inexpensive, and you can pre-order and go pick them up, or you can buy them at local plant sales. So I would urge you to please support this nursery, because you're not going to find milkweeds in too many places that are pesticide free. A few other nurseries I found and really like are Spadefoot Nursery down in Tucson, Desert Survivors in Tucson, and Borderlands in Patagonia. I would recommend all 3 of these. And everybody groans because they don't want to drive to Tucson to buy plants, but make it a trip, go down and see the hummingbirds in Madeira Canyon, and then pick up your plants. And all of these have, you can pre-order. Some of Borderlands will ship seeds to you, but none of these places will ship plants. So you've got to go order and pick them up. But highly recommend all 3 of these. If you like to grow from seed like I do, you can order seeds from, this is a nursery over in the Chino Valley, and they have many milkweed species. They have that beautiful broadleaf milkweed. So you can order seeds from them and grow your own. But you do have to be careful because they do have some, like the common milkweed, that are not native to here, and are not going to do that well for you. So if gardening isn't your thing, and you don't want to plant anything, you want to find other ways to help monarchs in the West, then there are certainly other things you can do, like participate in the tagging program with Southwest Monarch Study. There are other ways to track the migration. You can do the volunteer to help with the Western Monarch count in California. And if you go to the Monarch Joint Venture website, there's a whole list of other things that you can participate in. And most importantly, if you have money to spare and you want to support monarch conservation, Monarch Watch would be my first choice for you to donate money to, because they do so many wonderful things for monarch conservation. But there are many other organizations you can select as well. So, if you've never seen a monarch, or you haven't seen many, and you don't really feel a connection with them, you pretty much have to spend some time with them and fall in love with them, so that you'll want to help them. So where can you go to see breeding monarchs in the Verde Valley? Well, you can come out to our Monarch Way Station Pollinator Garden at the Page Springs Fish Hatchery Visitor Center. And this is a cooperative project between Northern Arizona Audubon, Arizona Fish and Game, and Monarch Watch. And this garden's been in for 7 years, and it's maintained by, right now we have about 10 volunteers. We're always looking for more if anyone's interested. And we have a lot of milkweed in there, 6 native species, and over 30 wildflower species that provide nectar for butterflies, bees, and hummingbirds. And that was the one stipulation with the fishery folks there, is that we use only natives in the garden. So you won't see any showy annuals or anything like that. It's all natives. And I'm actually going to be there this Friday. It's my turn to work in the garden. So if anybody wants to come out and see the garden, or wants to see what these milkweeds look like in real life, I'd be happy to show you around. I'll be there from 8 to 10 on Friday. Another place to go is the Cottonwood Community Garden. There's a lot of milkweed in there now, and a lot of nectar sources. Some people don't grow vegetables, they just grow flowers. So it's a great place to go just to watch butterflies. And in my first year here, I grew about 1,000 milkweeds, and I loaded up my van and took them over there and walked in and told all the gardeners I had free milkweed. Please come get some if you want it. And they cleaned me out. So there's a lot of milkweed in there. And where can you go to see fall migrating monarchs in the Verde Valley? There are several places. First of all, at Red Rock Crossing at Crescent Moon Ranch Community Garden on U.S. Forest Service property. That's Janie in there with some volunteers. I did a little training for them, showed them how to tag monarchs, and then they went crazy with it. So if you want to do tagging, there are times that you can come and help, or do it yourself. And when you first do it, it seems a little awkward. It feels like you really do need 3 hands to get that tag on the monarch wing. But once you do it a few times, it becomes pretty easy. So the area in the garden has a lot of nectar sources and milkweed. And the area surrounding the garden has quite a bit of horsetail milkweed just growing in the field. So it's a great place to go to look for monarchs, even during the summer. And then, of course, I mentioned before the Montezuma Well restored grasslands, the pasture trail that loops around. There is quite a bit of horsetail milkweed in there as well. A lot of it was planted by folks from the Southwest Monarch Study. And it has spread very nicely in some areas. So great place to go, and also lots of nectar sources. And then I mentioned before Rocking River Ranch. I think I'm predicting this is going to be a great place to see monarchs. It's right on the Verde River. So right in their migratory path in the fall. And when I was there, when they first opened, I found quite a bit of milkweed, climbing milkweed, and a few other species. So there could potentially be a good breeding population there as well this summer. So I'm ending the slideshow, but it's not really the end. It's just the beginning of your love affair with monarchs. And if you want more information on Monarch Way Stations, you can go to monarchwatch.org. And I have just revised my plant lists for Sedona and the Verde Valley. If you'd like one of those plant lists, just email me and I'll send it to you. And then please stop by the Page Springs Monarch Way Station when you get a chance to, and I'll be there this Friday if you want to come then. Alrighty, thank you, and I'll take questions now.
Well, thank you so much, really appreciate it. And one of the first people to ask a question out there was Janie Agigos, who you just talked about in a previous slide. And Janie, I allowed you to talk, so pose your question or make your comments.
Oh, well, great presentation, Denise. Thank you so much. Let's see. my questions were, just silly ones, and I think most of them you answered. I just thought I remembered somebody saying that I thought it was Gail Morris said that there were a few butter monarchs that overwintered in like southern Arizona, Phoenix or Tucson or something. Is that not true?
Yes, that's true. I'm glad you brought that up. I forgot to mention that. Yes, a lot of the apparently what happens, a lot of the later migrating monarchs, it's just they stop the migration when the sun's angle gets at a certain level. And that usually ends up being somewhere between Phoenix and Tucson, so that there is an overwintering population there, as well as a few locations in Southern California around San Diego.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think that was my main question. I'll get with you on things that I missed because Rita and I were talking. But thank you, Denise. This was really great.
Sure, my pleasure.
Maybe see you Friday.
Alrighty.
Before you mute, Janie,
Yes.
is there a monarch butterfly project that you have that people could join in on by joining Friends of the Forest?
Well, we were trying to do some monarch tagging at Crescent Moon, but I think Denise has kind of helped us with that and taken that over. Denise, would you like us to resume tagging there, or do you got it covered? Do you have it covered?
Either way, I can come help you, or however you want to do it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So we might try to do another session of that this fall. It's just the last couple of falls were either no good or, I can't really remember, but I feel like we had a freeze and I don't remember. So anyways, yeah, that would be something that we could look at. But Craig, we did some milkweed plantings at our station, and we had volunteers watering those milkweeds for like 3 years. And when we quit watering, or 3 summers, consecutive summers, and when we quit watering, most of them didn't make it. We do have a few, hanger-oners, but that site is on a fill, a cut and fill operation. And so that fill is just really compacted hard soil. And so that was kind of a little bit of a bust. But we definitely have been including milkweed seed in our seed balls and in our hydro mulching restoration efforts out along Forest Road 525. So we're still doing that, but nothing super volunteer oriented unless we do some fall tagging. And Denise and I will talk about that before the fall.
Great. Thank you, Jamie.
If I could just add to that real quick, planting seeds in the ground in this area is really challenging, because we've got not only ants that like to come get the seeds and carry them away. We've got gophers that are digging, and we've got not the best soil and not a lot of rain, so that makes it very challenging. And I've tried many different methods of planting milkweed seeds with not much luck, but what I found to work the best so far is making those seed balls and using 1/3 native soil, 1/3 worm compost, and 1/3 clay, and making these balls and then just healing them into the ground. And what I found is not working too great at the lower elevations, but does have some success at the higher elevations of 5,000 to 7,000 feet. So keep that in mind. And the other thing we've done with seed balls is, after planting them, is we've done a little circle of cinnamon, ground cinnamon around them to keep the ants away, which seems to work until it rains. So that's usually a pretty long time, and it gives the seeds a chance to germinate. Okay, next.
Great. If you would send me the list of the best monarch plants, what I'll do is make sure that I post it on the KSB website under speaker series, because there'll be a little blurb there, and folks can watch the recording of this. I'll make sure that list gets put out there if you would send it to me.
Okay, actually there'd be 2 lists. One is specifically for Sedona and the other's for the lower elevations. So I'll do that. Thank you.
Great. And there was one question about where we can find milkweed to plant, but I think you answered that earlier. Is it's really hard, and you've got to go to a nursery that doesn't drench things in pesticides.
Right.
But related to that was another question about what people can use as an alternative to pesticides, these nasty pesticides, for our flower gardens.
Uh, actually, you know what? I don't use any controls for insects in my yard. I let the birds do it, and they're really quite effective at taking care of any insect infestation that I get here. So that's been my tried and true method. Even with aphids, the verdin just love to eat those aphids, and if they find them, they'll eat them all up. The other thing I would suggest is I know that at least Ace Hardware in Sedona does carry live ladybugs. So if you have aphids, you can release those. But just know that ladybug larvae will also eat monarch eggs and caterpillars. So it's kind of a toss up how you want to deal with that. But if you have an infestation in the early summer before the monarchs get here, then that's not a problem. So I actually have used ladybugs a few times with good results.
And another question that relates more to out in California, but someone is saying they were informed that people should not plant milkweed within 5 miles of coast or nesting areas, such as some trees in Balboa Park. Are you aware of this requirement?
I am not. I'll see what I can find out about that, and I'll give that to you as well to post on your site.
Excellent. And someone is asking, and I think this relates back to your comments about being careful about the nurseries you go to, but someone specifically is wondering where to purchase Greg's mist flower.
Any of those 3 nurseries in Tucson will have that for sale. I'm thinking the most likely nursery of the 3 would be Desert Survivors, because they have the biggest selection. But with all 3 nurseries, a lot of it's seasonal. So you can go on their websites, and they have a current plant availability list. So you can see when they have it, and then it's very popular. So you would need to order it right away and then go pick it up. I don't know of any other nurseries besides those 3 that would have that species. But let me just say this, every year at our garden at Page Springs, we, because it is such a prolific grower, since we have irrigation there, we have to divide it. So if you let me know you would like some in the fall, we can, pot it up and save it for you. You can pick it up on the day that we divide it. And we actually do that with a lot of the other species in that garden as well. So, we'd love to give them away. Just let us know.
Great. And if in the material that you send to me that I post on the website, if you could post the names of those 3 nurseries
Okay.
that you are good, I'll make sure that that gets up there too.
Okay.
And Terry Petrescu, I allowed you to speak, so
hopefully you can hear me.
we can.
Okay, so this is Terry, and I'm probably the largest gardener down at the community garden that was in the pictures. The Monarch group has a plot, but they don't have any interns. So the plot has become very weedy, and the milkweed's starting to come up. There's some gophers in it. I could use some help if anybody wants to come help sometime next week with weeding and trapping the gophers and planting some of the other seeds there.
Terry, is there no plan for any future interns?
That I don't know. He said he didn't have any of his grant funding right now, so he didn't have an intern.
No. Okay.
So
Well,
one of the other gardeners and I are trying to keep it at least going some.
Yeah, I'll spread the word on that as well. Hopefully we'll get you some volunteers to come take care of that.
And Terry, if you could in the chat put your email or phone number for anybody who wants to help, so they can get in contact with you to know when to show up there, that would be great.
Okay. They could also send Denise an email because she has my
Got it.
email.
Okay.
Or Janie.
All righty. That's the end of the questions that were submitted in to me. One question I had is, are there any particular of the habitats in the Verity Valley that monarchs prefer? Do they want to be around a continual water source, shaded areas, sunny areas? Is there anywhere in particular that people should be looking at?
Well, as far as summer breeding monarchs who are looking for milkweed and for nectaring on wildflowers, a full sun location would be the best. And that's why I'm hopeful that there are several fields at the new state park, Rocky River Ranch State Park, that I think are going to be great places for watching a lot of different butterfly species coming to nectar on those plants, as well as for breeding monarchs. And then the other places I mentioned before, anywhere along that trail at Montezuma Well, the restored grasslands, and of course the gardens that Terry just mentioned. I haven't really found that many places down here in the lower elevations where milkweed grows. Mostly, I guess, because it's been eradicated by the people who are raising livestock. So the other place I would tell you to go would be up on the top at the summit of Mingus Mountain. There's a field there that has a lot of right across from the big parking lot there. There's a field that has a lot of horsetail milkweed. So that's a good place to go. And anywhere further up by the little lake up there on the top, around that lake, there's also a lot of good nectar sources. So I would say full sun locations rather than shady.
Wonderful. Well, we're 6:15 is usually the time for us to stop. So thank you so much for this. This was really interesting and a really important thing. Keep Sedona Beautiful right now is redoing its landscaping that had been neglected for almost 20 years. And one of the things we're going to focus on is planting for monarchs and for hummingbirds. And we look forward to revitalizing our monarch way station status, because we had it at one point, but I think most of the plants that qualified us went by the wayside when the garden was neglected. So we're in the process of revisiting that right now.
Well,
Thank you so
That can't be.
Yeah, thank you so much, Denise. Really appreciate it. And a recording of this presentation should be up on the KSB website sometime tomorrow.
Great. Thank you so much.